final until the 2021 budget provisions. Number one, annual requirement for settled labor contracts, 142,659, which is tab 6, item 55. B, unsettled labor contracts, 2373847, that's tab 6, item number 56 and 57. C, net job evaluation pay equity changes, 256,682, that's tab 6, item 59. Net progression increases per contracts, 9,726, that's tab 6, item 60. And employment and labor relations reserve one-time labor-related authorizations, which is 1,081,121. We'll separate this out. So for which one was it? 1B will be separated out. There's a number of us that declared a pecuniary interest for that item. So if you are one of those, you will not be voting on that separated item. So can I get a... Yeah,
Mr. Chair, point of order. Sorry, it's Judy. Perhaps just for the notes and for the public that are listening, we should probably declare those pecuniary interest in public, just to let the public know who is declaring.
Sure. And should we just read those from the minutes from the closed session, or should we have...
we can read them. Everyone's present, and if there's any changes or additions, we can add them on.
Sure. Let's read those from the minutes then, just to make sure we catch who called that in closed session.
Okay, so we have Councillor Brock McGregor, we have Mayor Caniff, we have Councillor Crew and Councillor Pinsino, all declaring a conflict of interest on the non-union as they have an immediate family member related.
Great, thanks. Thanks for catching that. And do I have a mover and a seconder for the motions excluding the 1D? I've got moved by Councillor Finn, seconded by Councillor Harrigan. So with that, I will call the question. Do we have to electronic vote, or do we just look for...
We'll have an electronic vote. Yeah.
Okay, all votes are in and the motion passes.
Okay, and then we need a mover and a seconder for 1B, and that will exclude any of those mentioned with the pecuniary interest. Moved by Councillor Hall, seconded by Councillor Harrigan. And I'll call the vote. Just a reminder, those with pecuniary interest should not vote.
And all votes are in and the motion passes.
Okay, the next item is deputations.
This first deputation was submitted by Henry Sveck. He submitted a video link with the deputation that was provided earlier today to council. Good evening. I hope you had a chance to review the 3-minute video I provided that explains my point. The $800,000 in annual cost to cut the grass along the roads and municipal lands needs to be reduced or stopped. Doing so will allow the wildflowers and other beneficial plants to grow, supporting natural pollinators and honeybees. You may also wish to consider a 50% cut in the grass cutting funding, putting the remainder towards salaries for employees to propagate wildflowers and stewardships of the lands. It will still result in a $400,000 or more annual saving, yet improve our community. As stated in the video, I can understand why you may not want to do this, but please consider the benefit to our environment, the pollinators, the honeybees, and the ability to lead by example. Few municipalities have taken this bold step and combined savings in tax spending, yet benefiting our communities. Thank you, Hank. This next deputation was submitted by Larry Hutchins. Chair and Council, thank you for accepting my deputation. Several years ago, our fire chief made an in-depth proposal to move Chatham-Kent to a fire medic model, as his professional firefighters were also trained paramedics. With the ongoing pandemic and the need for trained staff to assist in our municipal nursing homes, it is possible to assign our professional firefighters to assist, as required in our nursing homes when they have no other assigned duties. Of course, the homes would need to understand that these were not scheduled staff. They were there as an addition and would need to leave in case of a fire or other emergency. This would save financial resources for our nursing homes, increase the available staff in the homes, and help provide better care to our older citizens in their time of need. Thank you for your time and thoughtful consideration.
This deputation is from Marley Robinson. Your Worship and Councillors, at every public budget discussion in the last few weeks, administrative staff have highlighted the welcome increase in new residents to Chatham-Kent who increase our overall tax base, providing ongoing funds to continue to upgrade our infrastructure, support our healthcare, our schools, and our municipal services. Budget presentations have emphasised that we all must continue to do all we can to make Chatham-Kent appealing to current as well as new taxpayers. We know that comparatively low housing costs are an attraction, but potential buyers look for much more than price of housing. They require a high quality of life. What does that entail? Libraries, art galleries, sports centres, tourist attractions, theatres, concert halls, parks, outdoor activities, heritage districts, volunteer opportunities, and ongoing education options. These may not be at the front of the line when you decide where our tax dollars should go, but if we do not support quality of life segments of our community, we are wasting our money on other community costs. Our cultural heritage, tourism, and sports facilities are not extras or add-ons or just fun things. They are vital integrated elements of our economic development. You heard an excellent outline of what our libraries offer. You also received a report from Audrey Ansell on tourism, including a call for an additional employee, a call which I hope you will approve. The current excellent two-person tourism team is accomplishing miracles, but could do so much more with a third leg to their stool. The Thames Art Gallery is pressing ahead with virtual visit art exhibitions and active social media, plus support from Your TV. Artspace in downtown Chatham, the venue for sales and exhibitions by Chatham-Kent visual artists, is about to install a community artwork in their window celebrating Black History Month. Many of us look forward to full opening of both these facilities, as well as the opening of our heritage museums. Twice, Council has approved funding for life cycle upkeep of the exterior of Ridge House Museum, painting the front porch, repairing the fence, and painting the exterior. Although local municipal staff are willing and able to do this work as part of their regular upkeep, that option has not been taken up. Surely exterior work to show that we care could be done while we wait to open this important local tourism and heritage assets. As you consider where our tax dollars will go in 2021, please keep in your minds all these and our other vital heritage, tourism, culture, and sports assets, so necessary to our economic development and our quality of life. And this deputation is from Greenwood Cemetery Corporation. Dear Mayor and Council, the Greenwood Cemetery Board respectively request the previous operating grant of $10,000 received from the municipality be restored. Prior to Chatham-Kent's 2015 notice, it would no longer wish to act as the Greenwood contracted operator. The cemetery received a grant from Chatham-Kent, as it had prior to amalgamation from Ridgetown and Howard Townships councils. As members of council are aware, cemeteries usually operate at a loss. Of the 6 active cemeteries maintained by the municipality, Greenwood would be similar in size and operation to Dresden, Evergreen, and Riverview. Considering the 2020 municipal base budget reports a total of $454,684 for cemetery operations, which are collected across all wards. Support for Greenwood would provide for fair and equal treatment. I would be pleased to provide any information, details, or answer any questions you may have. Sincerely, Jim Brown, Chair.
Thank you. And we will now move back into the budget binder. So we're going to pick up where we left off in the infrastructure tab, tab 4. Do we have any other motions related to items on this page? Can I see the attendees? Okay, I don't see any other motions. Reminder, we can come back if at a later time someone wants to review anything on this page. So we will move to tab 5, previously approved items. Any motions related to previously approved items? Councillor Sakachi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a question in regard to Mr. Kelly, Director of Infrastructure and Engineering. In item line number 14, this is something that we've talked about in the past budget in regards to a decision that was made, I think was back in 2013. I'm just curious to see, I noticed in discussions and looking through things, the October variant report still has a shortfall of $900,000 in regards to snow removal. Is that accurate?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's Thomas Kelly, General Manager of Infrastructure and Engineering Services. So the October variance, it is accurate as of that date. And right now, our teams are gathering all the invoices right through to the end of the year and working with our finance team to come up where we stand. We estimate, though, that we'll have approximately about $1 million shortfall. That's where we're at. That's our best guess without doing all the detailed calculations. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So my original motion was going to be to remove this. Given that conversation, I guess I think it's important for the community as well as council to know exactly why we're seeing such a major shortfall. I know that this has not been a challenging winter, and I do know there's been a change to the minimum maintenance standards, but I'm just curious to see if we're operating at $1 million shortfall this year. How are we supposed to operate if we ever see an actual Canadian winter? And I'd just like to see if it's something that's in regards to procedures that's happening, or why exactly this shortfall is coming. Because as mentioned, I had full intention to remove this $125,000.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, just conceptually, how do we come up with these numbers that what we think is required for our winter control operations is that we usually take and look at the last 5 winters and we come up with an average, and that's what we put in our budget. So there are going to be years where we're going to have a favorable condition, less than budget, and that will go into a reserve. Other years we will have spent more, and that's the case we're in right now. So your point is that you're right. Even though the last couple of years have been very favorable as far as winter control goes, this is a huge risk to eliminate this amount of money, because what we're saying based on the last 2 years, there still is no accumulation of reserve that we can rely on. In fact, we're in a that really we can depend on. We could have one major snowfall and it would be completely wiped out. So what is happening is that year over year, costs are going up though, and we're not keeping pace with those costs. And overall, that's where we stand as far as the overall situation. So by considering eliminating this, really it does have a tax benefit, but it just means that at the end of the year, you're placing your overall budget at higher risk as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, my last question, and this will be to either Mr. Brown or to Mr. Quinton. So Mr. Kelly actually provided the specific answer I was looking for. So if we have a good year, so to speak, and the monies are not spent, those monies are then transferred into a reserve that basically at that point sees no benefits to the tax base unless it's actually pulled from the reserve or we see a shortfall. Can you explain why that money would not just carry over to stay in that, so we're not constantly seeing a shortfall in that area, and we're always having to put extra in instead of going directly to the reserve, if that makes sense?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councillor Sakachi, for the question. As Thomas has indicated, we are in a deficit in our winter control, and we've been perpetually in that deficit for many, many years. And particularly, just to give some history for those that don't remember, that it was in the 2013 budget that the council of the day cut $500,000 out of the salt materials line of the budget without considering any service reductions. In fact, the service that Thomas's crew provides is all mandated by the provincial minimum standards legislation, and there really isn't, as far as how much salt goes on the road or when it goes on, it's pretty well structured from those minimum requirements. So by, I would say rather foolishly, cutting a budget for things that we had to buy anyway, because we're mandated to buy it, was a mistake of the 2013 council, which this council has now been asked to fix by phasing in that $500,000, $125,000 a year throughout the four years of this term of council. So this council is paying for past council's mistakes, and we can't hide from that. And since then, continued inflation on the price of salt has actually caused that gap to increase even further. Last year, I would say, was an average, if you count 2020 being an average year, yet the Public Works Department has still experienced a $900,000 to $1 million deficit in the winter control area. It's not that they're doing anything wrong. It's not that they're wasting resources. It's that the budget is not proper for the area, and that's what we're trying to fix with a phased-in approach. And a motion tonight to remove this $125,000 just pushes that base request to next year. Yes, we could handle the $125,000 shortfall in 2021 through a draw from reserve if we have to, from the winter control reserve if we had to. But the ask in the 2022 budget will then be $250,000 to again try to get that base budget restored. The winter control reserve and tab 9 of your binder, 9E, are the reserves, and on line 58 is the winter control reserve. It actually has close to $2 million in that reserve, but we are planning to as per that October variance estimate, we're planning on taking $900,000 out of it. So $1,048,000 does remain at the end of is forecasted to be our current balance. So a motion to take the $125,000 from that reserve would be fine for this year, but it does mean that the request for $250,000 will be coming back in the 2022 draft budget.
Thank you, Mr. Quinton. So since that wouldn't be something that you would recommend, what about phasing the remainder of the balance over, let's say, a 6-year interval instead of I know that's going to go into, another term of council, and some of us may or may not be here, but is that something because of the challenges that we've seen this year with COVID, is that something that that you feel we could, financially, would that be something that would be financially okay in regards to not putting us in a much terrible position, but lightening the load even though it's somewhat slight?
Thank you once again. So my EMT's recommendation, well, our real recommendation would have been of course, not to do this in 2013 and to fix it as soon as possible. We actually did come with a recommendation 3 years ago to add the entire $500,000 in one shot. So I guess it'd be the 2017 or 2018 budget. That was rejected by council with the suggestion that we phase it in over 4 years. So by doing it over 4 years, we're experiencing a deficit every year. And we're not, as administration, we can't recommend stretching that out any longer. If you're looking for my real recommendation, it would be to add $250,000 to this year's budget, add an extra $125,000, and it not be an issue in being brought forward to future budgets. So sorry, I can't support that, but of course it's the will of council what motions. You're free to make whatever motion you like, but if you're asking that advice, I can't advise it.
And I appreciate that. So, Mr. Quinton, so the remainder balance would be $250,000. Is that correct?
Yes, to recover the $500,000 that was cut with no service level reductions in the 2013 budget, we needed a total of $500,000, which we were proposing to do over a 4-year period, and this is year 3. So yes, there's $250,000 remaining to still recover.
I know it's not significant, and I'm just going to put it to my fellow councillors. I am going to make the motion to spread the remainder of $250,000 over the next 4 years.
Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Finn, I see your hand. Was that Councillor Pincinel?
Yes, I'll second that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Pincinel. So we've got a motion by Councillor Scotchy, seconded by Councillor Pincinel. We'll get that up in a moment. I see a number of hands up, and I am not sure if they're for this item or for other items. So we'll try and keep the discussion to this current motion on the floor. Councillor Pincinel, did you have a comment on this motion? Okay, I don't hear Councillor Pincinel. The other hands I have up. Oh, there he is.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
okay, sorry about that. Okay, I got a question for Thomas on this one. Did we not last year have a surplus in our winter our winter file here? At the end of the year, did we not have a surplus?
I'd have to check with my friends in budget on that to see exactly what the number was.
But it was a surplus, was it not?
Stephen Brown, can you assist me with that?
Hey, Thomas, I'm just looking it up right now and I'll be able to get back to you shortly.
Okay. So if I could, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a comment if Councillor Pincinel is completed.
Well, go ahead.
So the other important aspect, and just as a suggestion for council, is that since 2013 as well, again, I mentioned earlier that we actually, our budget was set for the average amount of winter snowfall that we saw over a 5-year period. We have had costs going up, and that has not kept pace. The other thing that has happened is that we, as you may recall, during the exact year was, I believe, 2016, we moved as well to a new service level on sidewalks. And what we decided to do, we used to just clear the snow on the sidewalks for Chatham and Blenheim. And we made an increase in that to do all of Chatham-Kent. And then in 2018, you may recall that we, I think it was 18, maybe 19, sorry, we were at Tilbury Arena area, one of our meetings, and we talked about the new requirement from the Ontario provincial government of minimum maintenance standards on salting as well. And we had quite a lively debate on what was the best level of service, and we decided that we would salt the downtown cores and all municipal buildings, of course, but we would ask residents to salt their own sidewalks. As part of that, the staff recommendation at the time was just to meet the minimum maintenance requirement. And this is an idea for council that the requirements for downtown were to salt within the 24 hours when any time there was formation of ice. And that was done for good reasons, to keep a very high service level. But this is a true means of which we can still meet the minimum maintenance requirement, which is 48 hours, and salt the downtown. So if there's consideration of looking for savings, here's some options available for council. You know, for example, we could extend that requirement to salt to businesses downtown. If that's not acceptable, to at least move to the minimum maintenance requirement that we do it within 48 hours, because it's done within 24 hours, which is actually higher than the minimum maintenance requirements. That does cost additional money. It would be very difficult for me to say because of the variable of winter and the number of storms, but definitely we wouldn't have to apply as much salt and as quickly as we do if we didn't meet this service level that actually exceeds the minimum maintenance standards. Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas. And Steve's got that number for us now.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So Councillor Pence, the winter control last year had a deficit of $622,000.
Steve, could you repeat?
Okay, thank you.
You cut out there, Steve, for me. Could you repeat that number, please?
Sure. The 2019 deficit in winter control was $622,000.
Okay, thank you.
And did we, I'm still seeing a number of hands up that were up prior to this motion as well. So I'll still go to you, but if your questions are on this motion or this item, we'll certainly discuss them. And if it's for a different motion, we'll just push that to the back until after we vote on this one. So Councillor Oche, was your hand up related to this motion?
Actually, no, it's related for another one. Thank you.
Okay, I'll come back to you. Councillor Wright, was your hand up for the comments related to this motion?
No, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Bondi, was your hand up related to this motion?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. What is our annual cost for winter control? Which I know it varies depending on the year, obviously, but I'm just trying to get my head around the idea that we had a $600,000 deficit from last year when there was virtually no snow. Just as a not now, but a previous commercial owner of a property on Richmond Street, I had a record low snow removal bill last year, like in 20 years, a record low. So if we ran a $600,000 deficit last year, can somebody just explain how? We didn't really get any snow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll ask my friends in budget again to give the precise number of what we have in the 2021 budget. But so, as I mentioned just a couple minutes ago, is that we have actually increased the service level from past, so that has driven up costs. But I can tell you almost every single morning, I get a series of about 10 emails from our supervisors across Chatham-Kent. And although we haven't gotten the snow, we continue to get the ice. and that's a very strong requirement as well of the MMS. So we do less plowing of snow, but we do a lot more salting than what we've done in the past because our temperatures are hovering around zero. Typically, you may see some melting during the day and then freezing at night. That's one particular aspect. The other one is that in the cities in particular, you don't see as much, but in the rural areas, because of the wind that forms, any snow that's out there is continually causing drifting. And my colleague just mentioned to me today that there was absolutely no snow in Chatham, no requirement, and yet we had a number of very large drifts that we needed to be out there clearing. So it's a combination of those two. So there is more efforts. It's just because we don't have snow doesn't mean we don't have costs. Our crews are still out there on a regular basis. This time of year, we have been salting a great deal. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, just a quick follow-up. If our deficit, and this is probably for Stephen, if our deficit last year was $600,000, what was our actual cost last year for winter control? If it's handy, which I'm sure it's not. But.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So the actual cost for winter control last year was about $5.3 million. That was a 2019, to be clear, not 2020. As 2020 is not finalized.
Okay, so 2019, I'm just thinking winter would typically be like a 2019, 2020, 2018, 2019. How do we, but we do this annually, I guess, so we take from January 1 until December 31st of one calendar year, and that's our winter control cost. Is not an actual winter, it's a calendar year.
Correct, that's correct, Councillor.
Okay, great. Well, thanks. That makes some sense. Now, my next question, I understand there's minimum standards and we're exceeding the minimum standards, but, and again, I'm a city guy, so admittedly, I don't see what goes on rural roads because I'm not out there. But I just have to ask, who makes the call when salting is necessary? Not to be critical, but in the city, I see some salting when, it's almost seems to be raining outside. So, we're exceeding the standards, and that's nice. It's costly, but nice. But where does the call come from to salt or plow? Even in our last snowfall in Chatham was only a couple of days ago, and I saw plows. I think maybe New Year's Day or Christmas Day, actually, we had a snowfall. So who makes the call? I understand it's likely a provincial directive, but the province is a pretty big place. So I guess you can read between the lines where I'm getting at. We've all received the same emails, right? Where people feel it's overkill, where we're salting and plowing when it's unnecessary. So if somebody could just address that, that would be appreciated.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's Thomas Kelly again from General Manager of IES. So the first question was who makes that call?
Yes.
And we have our supervisors. These are the leads of all of our garages. We have 10 garages throughout CK, located in all the areas of CK. They make that call. We have, they are constantly monitoring the weather, minimum of 3 times per day. And the requirement from, it's called OREG 239/02, and you can call it up, any of the members of the public can call it up, and you can look at the requirements. And in those requirements, for example, with sidewalks, is that if 24 hours beforehand, we feel there's even a possibility of ice forming, we need to take action. And then within 48 hours, we need to take action if we deem it to be a potential for ice or their ice has formed. So it's very similar to all of the roads. It's very much a call to say, on roads, it goes even further. They look at classes and an annual and ADT, annual of the amount of traffic on the road. And all of those have different standards. And again, it's laid out in a chart. At the bottom line is that supervisor looks at what the weather I have, is there potential condition for ice? And if he feels there is, and by the way, we have 10 supervisors, so they're always working with each other in making that call. Okay, do we need to go out? Yes, I feel we need to go out. Usually it's also, not only do they listen to the weather, they'll go out on the roads, patrol, and to ensure that there are icy spots before they engage staff to move forward and apply the salt. So why do we do this is because this legislation allows us to essentially minimize any further liability and lawsuits against the municipality, that if it was determined that we did not meet the minimum maintenance standard and there was an accident of some type, we would be liable for all damages. And my colleague, Mr. Taylor, can highlight that further if he's on the line, but I can tell you that that is a big part of our business. We're very busy with a number of lawsuits, but we do an excellent job of ensuring that the road is treated and also recording exactly the conditions that existed when we applied and making careful notes of that in the event that if unfortunate there is an accident of some type, we are well documented and can support our decisions in a court of law if necessary. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. I understand that. Now, my final question, not to chew up too much time here. Of the 10 garages, if one supervisor makes a call that salting is necessary, is that a very regional decision, or does the whole municipality salt? Similar to school busing, there are zones, you know, because it's not good here, it's okay here, it's okay there, not so good over here. So my question is, as I repeat myself, if a call is made in out of one of these 10 garages, is it a localized salt treatment, or does the whole municipality go into action?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the question. The answer is that it's very much of a local decision. And the reason is that Chatham-Kent is 2,500 square kilometers. And I can't tell you how many times we'll have a terrible blizzard in the Tilbury area and Bath will be completely clear. So it's very much a decision that's made, again, by the local supervisor. What I'm saying is that there is collaboration between all the supervisors looking at conditions, particularly trying to forecast and predict what the weather is going to do, but it's always made locally and it's made within his jurisdiction. So as you know, we have, for example, a garage in Ridgetown, we have one in Thamesville, and so on. We have them dispersed throughout Chatham-Kent. That supervisor is responsible for a certain area and he makes that call for that area. Thank you.
And the action is only taken in that area? In other words, if there's a blizzard in Bothwell, Chatham doesn't get salted.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and that's absolutely correct. And it's always based on the conditions at the time. You know, for the most part, if there's ice in one location, there's probably going to be ice in another, or a snowfall in one area. But we have seen many times, and that's just strictly due to the overall large size of Chatham-Kent, that conditions can vary. And we typically get different, even we have data on snowfalls and how it varies within Chatham-Kent over the year. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm pleased to hear that, because obviously the urban areas don't freeze as quickly as rural areas for obvious reasons. And it's nice to know that the decision isn't across the board and the whole municipality takes action when one small area has a problem. Thank you very much. Appreciate the information.
Thank you, Councillor Bondi. I don't see any new hands up for comment on this item. So if there's anyone else that does have a comment on this side. Oh, I do see a new hand. Councillor Sakachi, is your comment on this item?
Just clarification before it goes to vote, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
So just with the way the motion is actually wrote, it states that tab 5 for winter control salt materials be reduced. Technically speaking, though, we're not actually reducing any of the purchases for salt this year, and I just want to make sure that that's said to the council, that it's not actually, we're not reducing what we're purchasing this year in salt.
you, Councillor Scotchy. Thomas, is that an adequate interpretation by Councillor Scotchy?
Yeah, the way it's written, I can understand what he's saying. So we say snow removing salt materials, base budget increase. So I think it should just be clear that the base budget increase is 62,500 over the next 2 years. It says 3 years. I think they meant 2, right? So I think that should be what should be voted on, is in the positive, that item 14 be changed to 62,500 over the next 2 years.
I think his motion was to spread that out from 2 years to 3 years. So to get that,
okay.
Yeah. So I think the 3 years was his intention, and I think the clarification, is just mentioning that he wants to reduce the increase to the budget, and it's not decreasing the base budget amount, if I'm interpreting that correctly.
Correct, Mr. Chair. Thank you. That's correct.
Okay.
So therefore, it's really 250,000 divided by 3, correct? That's the amount. So, correct? 250,000 is the total over the next 2 years, divided by 3, which is 83,333. Correct?
I think he said this year plus 3 more years. So technically that would be over 4 years.
Well, 4 years. Okay, very good.
So if it's this year plus the next 3, yeah.
For this year and the next 3. Okay, sorry. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? I don't see any other hands up currently. Okay, not seeing no more comments, I will call this question.
All votes are in. And the motion passes.
Okay, other items on this page, Councillor Pinsonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My plan is to remove 16 and 17, but I'd like to give an explanation first before I do. Thank you. Of what they're for.
Okay, so do you want to do both of them together, or would you like to do them separately?
Yeah, you should do them separately, I think.
Okay, that might be a little clearer just so we don't get too much confusion. So let's start with item 16. So the question really is to explain what that item is related to.
Yeah, to me, it looks like it's just being put into a reserve.
Right. Okay, so we'll get an answer from staff in a moment here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's Gord Quinton, Chief Financial Officer. So back in, we're in year 5 of 10. So four budgets ago, the CFO at the time, Mike Turner, had brought a financial sustainability report to council and pointed out that we have no funding in our base budget for our strategic reserve. And as you know, not just at budget time, but throughout the entire year, as items come up that perhaps need some very quick funding and can't wait for the following budget, council often, this council and previous councils often dip into that strategic reserve. So this was to create a base amount, budget amount of 1% going into that reserve and phasing in that increase over a 10-year period. This council and the previous council has followed that advice for the last 4 years, and this is year 5 of 10 of that request.
Okay.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Councillor Pinsonneau.
Yeah, so I know we're always moving money into strategic reserve, and I think the problem with that is it becomes a slush fund, and just because we do seem to have an abundance of money in it. So that one I am going to move to have it removed, but I'd like an explanation on number 17 as well, please.
Yes, I think we'll just deal with 16 and then I'll give you an explanation on 17 after we voted on this one.
Yeah, so I'll come back to you for number 17 after we vote on. So you're moving to remove 16, correct, Councillor Pinsnow?
That is correct. I
Okay.
think this is a tough year that we're having, and it should be removed.
Okay, and then I will come back to you after this vote with your questions on number 17. Do we have a seconder to remove number 16?
Happy to second.
I think that was Councillor Finn.
Correct.
Okay. Any other comments on this particular item? I see 3 hands up right now. I've got Councillor Thompson, Councillor Wright, and Councillor Hall. In that, well, I got Councillor Thompson, okay. They're coming up and down. So we'll start with Councillor Thompson and we'll see what hands are still up after that. Councillor Thompson?
Thank you very much, Budget Chair. I guess I need some clarification. Are we canceling it for just this year? Are we canceling it outright for all the years forward? Are we canceling it? Yeah, what exactly are we doing when we talk about cutting it for this year? That's my first question. I need some clarification.
My intention was to just, sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Councillor.
My intention was just to remove it, this year, but this year is completely gone. We carry on next year. It can come back on our budget. Just this year is going to be completely gone. We don't make it up next year. We just carry on with the following years up to 10.
Okay, that makes sense to me. I appreciate that clarification. This is going back a little historical. I think back to maybe it was even around 2014 or maybe 2015 where we had something like this in the budget. I believe it was a 1% that we cut outright. If memory serves, it was Councillor Salmon at the time who moved that. Is this a similar reserve that I'm remembering correctly, or am I off base?
Thank you. I'm not recalling that particular motion. You know, this is a reserve that's just being built up for the things that come up throughout the year. If council is saying this is a particularly difficult year, delaying this 1 year, but still moving forward with next year being, you know, year 5 of 10, is, you know, it's not what the previous direction of council was to phase it in over 10 years, but if we're deciding to phase it in over 11 years, at least we're still on track of getting that needed strategic reserve annual allotment in place so that we're able to handle things that take priority. And I know I mentioned about things that come up to the year, but there's also many things in this year's actual budget document that are funded from the strategic reserve as well. But it does have a healthy balance rate now of approximately $2.5 million in it after what's in the forecasted, the 2021 draft budget is approved. So I'll leave it there, but that,
okay.
I can't recall motion, Councillor Thompson.
That's quite all right. It's just something that's tickling my brain. I think Councillor Pinsnow hit the nail on the head as far as I think too often, and council's guilty for it. Let's not pretend we're not, for diving into that as a slush fund, and sometimes we get a little fancy with how we move and how we develop reserves. I remember a $18.5 million reserve that was put aside for one thing, and then seemingly, not arbitrarily, but divvied up to a couple of whims after that project fell through. So I think that ties into the second reserve we're going to be talking about as well. Again, though, just for clarity, the way I understood what Councillor Pinsnow was talking about was that next year is year 6 of 10, not 5 of 10. So ultimately, it would become a 9-year top up and not a 10-year top up. Maybe that's a conversation for another day. But again, I believe that was Councillor Pinsnow's intent. Either way, this is something I would be supporting, if for no other reason than I think it makes us even more cognizant of the money we do spend, and that reserves aren't there for whims. Thank you.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up on what was talked about this, this reserve being kind of a slush fund and something that we, as a council, kind of dip into throughout the year. Gord, do you have any, I guess within the last year, how much money has been pulled from this reserve for, for different initiatives that we've, as a council, done throughout the year? Do you know that number offhand?
I don't immediately, but if there's other questions being asked, perhaps we can come back to this.
That sounds good to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Councillor Sakachi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question was somewhat answered by Councillor Thompson's questions. I guess I just wanted to see if there was a potential for the wording aspects when it's indicating. So is this going to be a 0.1 tax increase from 22 to 27, or is it still going to remain 21 to 26, and we're just missing that year? I just want to be clear on that one, because if we're keeping it with the 10 years, then obviously this would extend it by a year, and I'm just looking for that clarification. And if that's a friendly amendment so we can still continue this, I'm not sure if Mr. Councillor Pinsonneau exactly if he was indicating it's still going to go on for 5 years or just skip this year entirely. Just need that clarification.
My intention was to just eliminate this year altogether. So we would be starting year 6 next year. Like I say, this is a strategic fund, and as Mr. Clinton said, it's quite healthy. It's $2.5 million in there right now. This year, by eliminating it altogether, really is not going to have any effect on it.
Correct. So then it would extend it to 2027 then.
Thanks for the clarification.
Right.
And just to be clear as well, it's still being deferred to the 2022 budget and beyond. So whether it's 6 to 10 or 5 to 10, that can be changed in subsequent years. And, likely we should be allowing that those decisions to be made by the next council for their years as well. So I think the focus should be on what we're doing with the funding this year, and we can worry about how many years that goes for during the next and subsequent budgets from there, as it's something we can review annually. Was there any other, I see one more question on this motion, Councillor Foss.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This funding is also used for replacement of facilities. Is there anything in the near future that we're going to be looking at replacing and taking that money out of that reserve?
Councillor Foss, that'll be item 17 is the one related to facilities. So we'll get to that one after this motion. So we'll hold, I'll make sure I come back to you for that question when we discuss 17.
Okay, but if you look at the what do you call it, briefing notes.
Yep.
Under 16, it indicates that as well.
Okay, maybe we can get some clarity from Gord on that one.
Yeah, I believe that briefing note talked about both these lines sort of together, so I think that's where the.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll wait till the next one then. Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Foss. And Gord, did we have the number from Councillor? Oh, we've got. I'm told we have 30 seconds until we have the number for Councillor Hall.
Yeah, the budget team's working on it, and it'll just be a 30 second. If that was the last question, we just have a.
Oh, we have one more. I see another hand, Councillor Harrigan. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. And mine's a 30-second question through to the CFO. Gord, can you please confirm for me the process of how we spend things on reserves? Like all of our reserves have categories and names, and we need to apply those funds to what it would be in that category. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question. Overall, this is the planned use of each of these reserves. So even if I go back to the previous discussion that we had on winter control, the planned use of that reserve is for winter control related items. That's what council has approved, putting the money into reserve to look after. This one that we're talking about right now is the strategic reserve, which really doesn't have a solid definition of what it can be used. It does get used for a variety of purposes strategic things that come up through the year that council puts a priority on and is looking for funding for. We'll give you examples of what we spent it in 2020 in just a second. But this is sort of if there is one reserve that sort of I would call a general reserve, this is it. And actually, as we move forward into a multi-year budget, we will be perhaps renaming this reserve or combining it with another reserve, which we'll call a tax rate stabilization reserve, because we will have to deal with quite a bit of changes that come along year to year in those when we get to the multi-year budget, because we'll be 4 years between actually having these meetings in the future. So yes, they're all earmarked for something, except I would call this, if there's one reserve that you want to call the general reserve, it's this one. We called it the strategic reserve, but it's the general purpose reserve that basically council can, council of course has to always approve any transfers from reserves, but this is basically council's reserve to do whatever it thinks it needs to do throughout the year.
Great, thank you. And that last point that you made, I think, is really important. And I'm not going to be nitpicky because we're already very deep into budget, but calling a reserve a slush fund, I think as council, we need to take ownership of that slush fund, because it's us that's approving where those reserve funds are going from the strategic reserve. So I think that there's a lot of negative connotations that come with that. And I think it's important that we have savings, and I'm glad to see a really healthy amount in the strategic reserve, because as a council, I think we have some really great ideas that need some money to implement from time to time. So that being said, I'm going to support this because we do have a healthy amount in the strategic reserve, and this is probably the year that we save a little bit less to help out our residents. But I did want to point that out, the importance of procedure and how reserves are spent, and how it's, not exactly just money that's thrown around from our reserve account into nothing. It's something that always goes through council from my memory.
Thank you, Councillor Harrigan. And did we have the answer from budget regarding past use of this reserve? I think we got our 30 seconds.
Yes, Steve, were you answering that, or did you have a list? There was 1,080,000 pulled out of that reserve in 2020. Steve, do you have examples or?
Hi, Gord. Yes, I do. So some of the examples, there's a spare set of PPE, so personal protective equipment for fire and emergency services. There's a community risk assessment, active 911 middle of project. There's computer equipment. There's a service vehicle for Chatham Township Garage. So those are just examples of different items that are within that council has made a decision to pull from that reserve.
Thank you, and appreciate getting that answer. Seeing no other comments on this motion, I will call the vote.
And all votes are in, and the motion passes.
And Councillor Pinson, I'll go back to you for item 17.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My intention is to pull it as well, but I want an explanation on it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So similarly, on the same council night when the previous item came to council, was a second recommendation of 1% being spread over a 10-year term to look after our aging facilities. And council received the BMA study back at the January 18th council meeting. And one of the items that we highlighted to you was that compared to other municipalities across southwestern Ontario and throughout Ontario in general, our age of our assets, off the top of my head, I think it was about 49 years old, our average age of our assets. That's not just our, we have our underground assets, but this specifically was for our aging buildings. We have not built, other than the animal shelter that we just built a couple years ago. If you look at our municipal buildings throughout Chatham-Kent, the age of them is getting just older and older, and council 4 years ago recognized that and started to put money aside. So when that buildings needed to be repaired, and this could be a library, this could be a fire station, any of our buildings, we would be able to have some money already set aside and not have to deal with that cost at the time that came up. So it's basically our aging buildings that this was to deal with, and is why this money has been set aside.
All right, thank you. Again, I think this is one of those items we can do without this year. 2020 was a rainy day year for sure, and this year we're going to find it tough to find savings to start with. And I think this is one of those nice to do things, but I don't think it's necessary. And I would like to move that it's removed.
Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Finn, I see your hand there. Is that to second?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. I've got, it looks like 2 hands related to this motion. Councillor Foss, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to ask the question again. Is there any facilities that we're looking at replacing in the near future that would probably eat up some of that or most of that or all of that reserve?
Thank you for the question. I don't think there's anything specified in the near future.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor McGrail.
Thank you, Chairman. My question is, tell me the difference between this reserve and the life cycle asset management plan reserve. The 1% that that's already in this budget.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I'll start off, and maybe Thomas will have some additional comments. Our life cycle building reserve is to maintain the buildings that we have. So, for example, an arena life cycle reserve sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, it's a life cycle asset management plan I'm talking about, sorry.
Well, actually, this specific reserve has more to do with just facilities, buildings, and not the entire plan.
Okay.
That's why I was going down this road. So facilities, buildings, whether it's libraries, arenas, any type of municipal building, we have money in our life cycle budget to maintain them. So when the roof needs a new one, we have money to put the new roof on. We have money to put the new HVAC system in. When a facility needs to be completely replaced, we have no money set aside, because often that replacement is much higher. I don't know if you want specific examples, but well, even if we use the Ridgetown Public Works Garage, I think is a good example. That building might have had a value, and I'm just pulling rough numbers. It would have had a value of maybe $1 million, and we had a life cycle budget to maintain it. Then a fire came along, and luckily we got insurance money that helped outpay for some of that, but it cost over $2 million to rebuild it. We don't, as public works garages elsewhere in the municipality age and perhaps need to be replaced, we have no money set aside for that extra additional cost for that new building. We just have money in our asset management plan to fix and maintain what we have. Maybe Thomas, you have more to add to that.
Thank you, Budget Chair. So in terms of raw numbers too, our life cycle plan, that asset management plan, that's the fund that has 26 different categories. It's 59.5 million. That's currently just about 54% funded. As Gord mentioned, that the Ridgetown garage is a good one. So we put away approximately, let's say, $20,000 per year just to maintain that building, windows break, new roof, and so on. And this particular fund is the fund that we know eventually our buildings are going to need to be replaced, buildings only, and this is the fund that we would rely on to do that. So the one that is most imminent in the forecast, I would say, is we've talked a lot about it, waiting for the fire master plan, but depending on what that fire master plan says, we may like to have a fund already established so that if it determines that our fire hall number 1 should be located in this vicinity, and as a result there's higher productivity and greater service levels, we could then rely on this fund to say, we've already got it set away, let's go ahead and build it now and improve overall service in fire.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Sakachi?
My apologies, Mr. Chair. My questions have just been answered. Thank you.
Glad to hear it. Councillor Latimer?
Thank you, Budget Chair. How much is in that fund right now, Thomas? Thank you for answering my questions too.
I think Gord might have that number.
Sorry, you just have to look up. I'll just be a second.
Thanks. Excuse me, Chair. Can I ask another question of Thomas while Gore's looking for that number?
Yeah, we've got that number now. It's $590,000.
Okay.
I just heard it across the table. Sorry if I preempted anybody.
Thomas, are we using this fund? Are we not replacing a garage? Is that not, have we already got that money? It's already out and accounted for.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you, Budget Chair. So as Gord mentioned, we have primarily funded the Ridgetown Public Works Garage with insurance funding, but with the sale of our Park Avenue Business Center, our storage for Public Works, that just went through Embley. Council approved an expenditure for a new Public Works garage on the same location, and we just approved the reserves to be transferred to cover off that cost late last year. So that one we have already covered for with another reserve.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, seeing no other questions on this item, I will call the vote.
And all votes are in. And the motion passes.
Other items on this page, Councillor Wright.
Chair, line 18, the University of Guelph, that's a 0 on there, but I see it on down further in the budget on page 9A, 21. Is this in the budget or is it out of the budget? And is it on the final line if it is in the budget?
Councillor Wright, we had a little bit of a hard time hearing you, but I think your question was clarity over item 18 and if that is a net zero impact or where we might find more information about that item in the budget. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, we'll get you an answer for that.
Thank you.
Gord, could you comment on that one?
Yeah. So 5 years ago, council approved a $1.5 million grant to University of Guelph Ridgetown campus for a I want to say crop sciences building, but I can't remember the exact purpose off the top of my head. So that project has still not gone forward as the university is still waiting for provincial funding to help out. They were trying to raise about 20% of the money locally, and with the rest coming from the province. The province has approved a smaller building that actually helps the field crop technicians this year. That's under construction at a cost of about $5 million without any municipal assistance. But this larger project, if I remember right, it was $15 million, and we were asked to fund 10% of it. $1.5 million is on schedule still for a build in 2022 or 2023. I have confirmed that with the president of Ridgetown College just a few weeks ago, that it's still an active project. It's moving up the list, and they expect for it to be funded relatively shortly. So basically what's happened is this money was being flowed from one reserve over to the Ridgetown College grant reserve over the last several years. As through a previous budget, we found another source of funding for it. And it's really a confusing line. We probably, we thought we'd be transparent to show it, but it is a net zero line. And if you look at the grouping schedule behind it, it's actually in and out because it was actually moving money, $200,000 the first year, then $325,000 for the next 4 years from one reserve to another reserve. So it's something that ended in 2020. There is no impact on the 2021 budget. It's fully funded, waiting for that project to get the okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other items under this tab? I don't see any other hands currently. I saw a hand come up and down, but I couldn't see who it was. So I will move on, but we can circle back if there's any other items of interest. So we'll move on to tab 6, items recommended. So we'll start on page 1. Any items on page 1? Councillor Harrigan. Councillor Harrigan, you're muted.
Wouldn't be a digital meeting if I wasn't. I have a budget item for line 24 regarding the budgeted amount for our investment income, and a motion on a motion that I had sent to staff regarding.
Okay. Yeah, if you go ahead, we'll get that motion up and then look for a seconder.
Perfect. So I would like to move that we increase the budgeted investment income on line 24 to $1 million. The reason that I'm requesting this increase is this is the amount that we've budgeted in previous years for our investment income. And I had asked a couple questions about this at opening night around how it is that we would fund or make up for the lost investment income, and is there a potential that the province may provide support? And I think, to be honest, there are too many unknowns for us to budget the decreased amount of investment, in my opinion. And for members of the public who are maybe less aware, if we have a surplus in one area of the municipal budget in any given year, then what we do with that surplus is we reallocate it to areas where we are off budget. So the reason I'm requesting this to take place is I think that it's important that we budget as if it's a normal year and then see what happens and make some decisions as necessary later in the year based on what we see as the income comes in Q2 or Q3. But I'll leave it at that, and I hope I explained it well enough, but I will rely on our CFO to answer any questions that people may have.
Thank you. And Councillor Sakachi, were you seconding that? Or sorry, I saw another hand. Mayor
That's
Caniff,
correct.
were you seconding that?
Yes, I was. I'd like to comment as well, please.
Okay, so seconded by Mayor Caniff, and then go ahead and, with your comments, Mayor Caniff.
Okay, yes, I echo what Councillor Harrigan said as well. I'd like to add to it that if we didn't have COVID, that I would fully expect that we'd be earning close to that $1 million with the interest rates. They've been impacted accordingly. I view this as a timing difference. Like, I'm hoping that in the next couple of years, post-COVID, it gets back there. So I don't see us permanently making an adjustment to our tax base for something timing. If we needed to, we'd come out of reserves for a year or two to cover off that rainy day that we're experiencing right now. I'd like to see the budget not have any impact related to COVID, and this is what I view as an impact because of COVID. So I certainly am supporting this, and I think it makes a lot of sense to cut this from the budget or add revenue to the budget. Thanks.
Councillor Sakachi, did you have a comment?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to commend Councillor Harrigan on that creative approach to in that regard. Just the only quick question I had is that if the shortfall does transpire, would it be just administration or the CFO coming to council in regards to coming up with that figure to council at a later date? Is that correct?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question. So there's a lot of complicated numbers in this one little budget line, but where this had come about is mainly just because of the drastic drop in investment income because of the interest rate drop caused by the COVID pandemic. And it happens to be not an eligible expense under any of the safe restart funding that we would get back from the province or federal government. They're paying for things like PPE or some of our loss of revenues at arenas and things like that, but they're not covering our loss of interest income. So we thought it was prudent to bring this to council's attention. But you're, as Mayor Caniff said, this has a lot of unknowns in it. We don't know how quickly interest rates might jump back. This is probably a short time blip of a year, but it potentially could go into a year, 2 or 3 years. But I think it's more of a shorter term blip. And if council approved the motion that's on the floor, and if we did end up with a year-end deficit even after any potential funding on our other COVID items from the federal and provincial government, if this is what's caused us a deficit, we would come back to council as part of our year-end, either our final variance reporting or year-end reports next year with that deficit, and we would either have to recover it in our 2022 budget or make a recommendation that this is a one-time loss and that we would fund it from a strategic reserve, that the reserve that we just previously discussed, for example. So I am comfortable with this motion. We did think it was the right thing to bring to council and include it in the budget. Like, I don't want to think, well, why did you bring it? Because we brought it because this may last more than 1 or 2 or 3 years. And, you know, if it's 3 years worth, this would be over a $2 million issue over those 3 years. So we wanted to bring it to council's attention. we are comfortable with this sort of hoping for the best. I guess as far as our COVID funding, that might be announced in the spring budgets of federal and provincial governments. And if we're at a loss at the end of the year, we'll have to deal with it then. But it would come back to council for if any reserve needs to be tapped to fund this at that point.
Thank you for the detailed analysis and explanation, Mr. Quinton, and I will be supporting this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sakachi touched on it, but I think for the people listening at home, it looks like we just decided we were going to make $1 million instead of $300,000. So, and Mr. Quinton touched on it briefly, but could you better explain for the folks at home where this investment income is coming from? What sort of, like, is it just sitting in a savings accounts? I guess that's my first question.
Thank you, Chair. We do have reserves where we have cash set aside for specific projects, and the reason why this is a supplementary item and not a base item is that some of those reserves have temporary peaked, saving up for some major projects, and I know I've talked about some of these over time. One of them would be the 3rd Street Bridge in Chatham, where we have a major bridge coming up. We're setting aside life cycle bridge money for that project. It's earning some interest temporarily as that bridge is engineered, but soon that money is going to be flowing out of our accounts to actually build that bridge. And so there's just happens to be quite a few of those projects that perhaps our life cycle reserves have built a little higher as these projects get engineered, but eventually that would come down. But that's basically what this supplementary interest of a total of $1 million is. We do have a base budget for interest income for what we consider our ongoing reserves. It's top of my head, I think it's a $1.8 million base. Steve, you'd probably correct me if I'm wrong on that. But this is the supplementary for that sort of top up of reserves that we have that was gaining some interest as it waited for those projects. Of course, on the other hand, I just want to point out though, as these projects wait, the cost of construction has been skyrocketing as well. So sometimes projects that are planned to be $1 million end up being $1,050,000 by the time we get to actually building them too. So there's sometimes there's budget impacts of that high inflation on construction projects as well.
Okay, so basically, in more detail than I had anticipated, but that's okay. So in a nutshell, these are tied to the like the Bank of Canada prime rate, right? Basically.
Yes, we have our we invest both with we have a good banking agreement with our excess cash. It's because of the size of our accounts, and we actually work together with the CCLAG group, the Chatham-Kent Lambton Administrators Group, go together on a banking agreement. So we actually do get some very good interest rates. They just have happened to drop by about 1%, 1.5% because of the COVID impacts. So we temporarily we're going to see a $700,000 shortfall that we wanted to bring to council's attention.
Right. Okay. And like you said, basically, and that interest rate dropped because the Bank of Canada rate dropped. They go part and parcel. And so we're kind of playing economists here and saying we expect this to rise in the near future. I don't know if I share that viewpoint. So what happens in you touched on it, but maybe you could just really dumb it down for me. I understand what's going on with GameStop today, but I don't really understand this. So next year, 2021 rates don't rise, 2022 rates don't rise. How do we allow for that going forward?
So as we let council be aware of it in this year's budget, if we're sitting at the exact same place next year, I think it would be prudent to make council aware of it again in the 2022 budget. I do anticipate rates to start to creep up as inflation, I think, will be. I know the economy seems bleak right now in some areas, but I think as the vaccine comes, there's a lot of pent-up demand and a lot of spending happening that will result in very high inflation 2 to 3 years from now. And so I do expect this issue to go away over a 2 to 3 year period. Maybe sooner, maybe later, but
all right. No, I think
economist mind.
I think what I'm trying to say is so you said 300,000 this year. We're saying no, $1 million, and next year you say to us, nope, it was 300,000 last year. Where do we find that 700 grand?
So as I said, if this is what causes us to be in a year-end deficit at the end of the year, of course, municipalities can't run deficits, and we'll be asking council to remove money from 700,000, if that was the exact number, from a reserve to cover the 2021 loss, and we'd be asking for it again in the 2022 budget.
And where do you expect, just off the top of your head, that reserve would come from? Which one would we pull it from?
Most likely that strategic reserve that we just cut funding to a little bit ago.
Huh, fancy that. All right. Thank you very much, Gord. I appreciate the info.
Yep.
Councillor Pinsonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think in these tough times, we need to be creative. We are hedging our bet here, so to say. It may come back to haunt us, but I don't believe it will. And if it does come back, this is a supplementary, so it can be taken care of by reserves, any one-time money. So I think this is a great idea for this year because we are in tough times.
Thank you, Councillor Pinsonneau. Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question to you, Gord. I had emailed you earlier today, and you had suggested that that this would come up at this line that we're talking about right now. So I know in the during the budget, the initial budget presentation that we had, there's an item on there that talks about COVID impacts and the 0.43% tax impact this year. What does this motion that Councillor Harrigan's put forward, does that, and what impact to the tax increase this year would this motion have on that? Does that is that eliminated this year, or is there still the 0.43% COVID impact tax increase?
Thank you for the question. Yes, this is exactly the 0.43% that we identified as a COVID impact. And yeah, so this is exactly that. All our other COVID impacts. So if you think of, we have extra costs in our land ambulance service. We have extra costs at Riverview Gardens. We have a lot. In fact, we had $17 million of extra costs in 2020 related to the COVID. Those COVID costs, so $17 million, that would be a hell of a tax increase. But we are counting on the federal and provincial governments to cover all those direct COVID-19 costs, for PPE and extra services that we've had to provide, and loss of our direct service revenue on whether it's transit revenue or arena rentals or that type of thing. We are counting on the federal and provincial governments to come through to fund that $17 million, if 2021 was to stay the same as 2020 as far as the COVID-19 impacts. This is one where on a claim form back from the province, we know that there won't be any will of the upper levels to refund us for our lost interest income. So that's why we've identified it as a COVID-19 impact on our opening night presentation. And this is exactly that 0.43%.
Okay, thank you very much, Gord.
Councillor McGrail.
Thank you. Gord, we're projecting the 300, and I know we're just getting out of 2020 now, but is there any kind of feel of actual for 2020 for our investment income? So I can judge it.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So of course, our January, February, March interest income was fine. So the first 3 months of the year was fine. It was in April and May that gradually the rates, every month the prime rates would drop more and more. I think it dropped 3 or 4 different times throughout the year. So the 2020 impact was probably a little bit less than this, because it was, let's take, for argument's sake, let's say for half the year impact. Where in the $700,000 forecast, we were forecasting that it does not rebound at all in 2021, and we were hoping for a rebound in 2022 or 23, but that it would be in the entire year staying at the current prime rate and with the full $700,000 impact. So that estimate of where we were at was included in our October variance that we took to council at the December 14th council meeting, and where we, with all our bottom line impacts, we were forecasting a $4.3 million deficit, which we have overall covered the final deficit there by the provincial and federal grants to our net bottom line. But as far as on a claim form to the province, it'll be all about our $17 million of actual identified expenses that we will be sort of proving our claim to the province of how we got to that $4.3 million bottom line deficit.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no other comments on this item, I will call the vote.
All votes are in, and the motion passes.
Thank you. And seeing that it is 7:30, we will take a 10-minute break and return and continue to work through on page 1 in this tab. So we will have everyone back on at, by my clock, 7:42. Thank you. As promised, we're at 7:42, so we'll resume. Just as an update, with approved motions so far, the budget increase stands at 3.17. So we'll continue moving through which tab we are in here. Tab 6, page 1. Any other items on tab 6, page 1? Councillor Harrigan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is not a motion, but I do have a question for clarification directed to Dr. April Redyke regarding line 19. So I will just ask. The question is, there's a comment in the briefing note and also in the item description around this amount, which is a net reduction to the base budget, noting that it equates to approximately 14 children for fee subsidy, child subsidy. And I initially had some concerns about this line item, but after a conversation with you, was reassured that in Chatham-Kent, those who do get a space for childcare and require subsidy are able to get it, because that's not exactly where the challenges lie in childcare. Can you please comment on that and perhaps elaborate a little bit?
Sure. Thanks, Councillor Harrigan. And Mr. Budget Chair, we have Kelly Emery is on line with us as well, and she is our Director of Childcare in Early Years. So I'm actually going to turn it over to her, and she will be able to provide a fulsome response to Councillor Harrigan's question.
Thank you for the question. And let me just explain a little bit further. So at this point in time, we do not have a wait list for childcare subsidy in Chatham-Kent. We have a wait list for licensed childcare spaces. And so what that means, we do have a lot of families and a lot of children that are on a wait list. And we are looking at any chance we can get to increase the number of licensed childcare spaces. But the other difficulty we run into is that we don't have enough registered early childhood educators to expand programs. So we are working through a few initiatives in growing your own ECE and working with St. Clair College in Chatham in order to increase licensed spaces. But at this time, we do not have a wait list for subsidy. It's a wait list for the licensed childcare spaces themselves.
Great, thank you for that explanation. That's really helpful because I know for myself personally, I certainly don't want to cut anybody's access to childcare, and it seems like the challenges we have in CK are in a different budget line when it comes to childcare. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harrigan. Do we have any other items on page 1? Seeing no other hands, we will move over to page 2. So tab 6, page 2, any items of interest, questions of clarity, comments, or motions? Councillor Sakachi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is directed to Dr. Redyke in regards to item line number 34. I see that it's a base budget for portable housing benefit. Is there any anticipation on how long this item is going to be on the base budget if things continue kind of how they are? I know I did read the briefing note, but I'm just wondering if there's any calculation to the challenges that we are facing right now.
Thank you, Councillor Sakachi, for the question. And Mr. Budget Chair, Ray Harper is on the line. He is our Director of Housing Services. This is Ray's first budget with as a director in Community Human Services, and I am going to let him answer this question. He is has some great work ahead of him in terms of making sure we increase our affordable housing. So Ray, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Sakachi, through the budget chair.
So this is will help support our affordable housing benefits to help meet our service level standards. We did receive a letter from the ministry with regarding not being able to meet our service level standards, which is a similar challenge that many other municipalities are having. We did have a shortfall of 215 units, but we've made very good progress in that shortfall with some of the affordable housing developments that are identified in the briefing note, such as what the Wellington Street and the George Street, which will the new recently approved projects, as well as some of the other units such as the Villa View that is just breaking ground, 45 Missioner and Kyle Drive. So essentially, we were short 214 units, and by these new additional affordable builds, we're still in a shortfall of 51. Now, the portable housing benefits, what that allows us is to bring people off our wait list and provide this housing benefit, which in the terminology of the portable, it allow them to basically subsidize their rent and move that within around Chatham-Kent as their needs change. So by funding this, and we will meet our service level standards and be able to provide the affordable housing that our community desperately needs.
Thank you for the detailed response. So I guess, Mr. Herbert, my question is somewhat answered. So am I correct in stating that this is going to be a one-time cost associated with this, or is this something that you anticipate coming back in the 2022 budget? That's the part I'm having a hard time understanding. It could be written. Okay. I'm just not quite catching that part.
No, this is a one-time base budget increase, and I don't anticipate coming back to council with an increase for this in the next budget year. I hope that answers your question.
So I guess then my question, you actually you definitely did, and this question would be either to Mr. Quinton or Mr. Brown, because this is a one-time fee, and it's directed, kind of basically in regards to the economic downturn. Why would something like this be funded through the base and not utilized through some of our reserves that are specifically, specifically there for these types of funding in regards to housing issues, the economy and people in a challenging situation?
Councillor Sakachi, I can answer that question for you just based on where we are in the binder here. So that is a one-time increase to base budget funding. So that's increasing the amount in the base budget. So that base amount would be increased this year and would be the same amount in subsequent years. So it's not a one-time ask of funding that would then not be needed next year. It's an increase to a base budget amount, just for clarity.
So that's so then basically this is something that's, even I understand the base aspect, but this is something moving forward we're always going to see the exact same amount of money, the $225,264 on a yearly basis.
So you wouldn't see that same amount next year. So if we approve it this year, it's moved into base budget. So it's not, there wouldn't be the same amount increased ask next year. So it will become a base budget item. So then you could find it as part of the overall affordable housing program budget in that big 600-page base budget document. That's where you'd find it next year if we approve it this year.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Any other questions on page 2 of tab 6? Seeing none, we'll move on to page 3 of tab 6. Councillor Harrigan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The question that I have is kind of related to page 3, but also to any of the other change in service positions. So the question I have is to Ms. Hoffman. Kathy, can you please share with me and the rest of council if all of the staff reductions are going to be found through attrition?
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. Councillor Harrigan, that's correct. So where you see in the briefing notes the commentary about being reduced by attrition, in some situations we already have, those positions have already been made vacant. And so we would be dealing with them through attrition that way, yes.
Okay, thank you. I also think this is something that's really important to call out. I know when we talk about staff, or there's the amount of staffing increase or decrease, it doesn't really humanize the people and the households and the families that are behind those staff. And certainly, while we always want to be mindful about the amount of public servants that we have at the municipality, it's really important to recognize that all of those public servants are working incredibly hard and also have families likely living in Chatham-Kent that they support. So thank you for that answer.
Thank you, Councillor Harrigan. Councillor Kirkwood-White.
Thank you, Brock. Just wanted to make mention of the fact that I had a very lengthy conversation with Kathy Hoffman about a week ago. And during that conversation, I shared with her some of the questions that I have been receiving from local constituents with regard to staffing. And I think this is probably the appropriate place to bring up some of these questions. I shared with her, about 8 or 10 different questions, and did receive some answers to those questions. And I would like to, at this point, recognizing that, as Councillor Harrigan has already mentioned, the staff within the municipality have worked very hard this year. So I want to recognize that before I ask this question. This is one of the questions that was received by a local constituent. What is the value of wages and benefits for proposed increases in 2020 for non-union staff? And if I could get Kathy Hoffman to explain that, please.
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. Councillor Kirkwood-White, just to make it really simple for you, if you take a look under this tab that we are currently in, that being tab 6, you will see from items 55 down to 60 contain all of the relevant information related to not only the non-union, but also our unionized area. I thought your question was going to be on the total of all of that and not just the non-union. So I had a number ready for you for the totality of that. So I will just take a minute and find just the non-union portion, but the total portion for all of our collective agreements is $2.7 million cost for all of our unsettled agreements for both our union and non-union groups. So if you just give me a couple minutes, I will find you just the non-union portion.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, can we come back to that one if you wanted to finish your other questions? Okay.
Certainly. Another question that I received has to do with the fact that many of the recreational facilities, museums, and specific programs have been shuttered during the pandemic. And the question was, what roles are those staff playing now that were not assigned to those particular programs or facilities?
Yes, thank you for the question, Mr. Budget Chair. Since the time of the pandemic, as soon as the provincial government made announcements around what was to be closed, stay open, varied in the way that service had to be provided, etc., the entire executive and senior teams went to work on implementing those strategies and identifying what the staff complement changes that had to take place were implemented. And so, for example, we had approximately 47 employees who were laid off during that period of time. We had approximately 80 plus employees. That was our low number. It fluctuated depending on the period, but 80 plus at any given time who were taking government leaves. We redeployed more than 110 employees to various areas. That included where we were having high intense needs for certain kinds of things, like, for example, at Riverview Gardens, at our transfer stations, we had employees redeployed to Erie Shore Drive during some of our peak emergency areas there. Employees redeployed at public health, working in our temporary shelter, and we've also had a number of employees who have been utilizing vacation banks. Certainly not that they were getting to go anywhere exciting, but also just taking some time to rejuvenate and make sure that they're keeping their vacation banks in check as well as. And right now we actually have about 37 employees that are currently still redeployed to other areas.
Great, thanks very much for the response. And this is not totally related, but one of the other questions that I received has to do with a request for a list of allocations to local nonprofits, charities, and social service organizations, together with the amount, duration, and purpose provided without the need for council's approval. This constituent has asked for similar information actually during the Facebook Live discussions and has yet to receive it. And I was just wondering whether that information will be provided and posted to the municipal website.
So thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. That would be a question for my colleague April Redyke to respond to.
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. So I have pulled that information together from my team. I have passed that on to our budget team. And this is going to sound like I'm going to pass it to them, but certainly, Steve, I guess I'm wondering, are we able to post what I provided to you this morning on the website? That would be the information that Councillor Kirker-White is looking for.
Thanks, April. The information that you provided this morning, we can post onto our website under the budget section, and we'll post that along with the information that's already there for the non-departmental grants that the municipality provides to charities and other organizations as well.
Thanks very much, Steve. And Kathy, if we can go back to the original question, if you've had time to look at that.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. Yeah, let me just give you one last number to add into this for you, and then I will have that there for you. It is $1.3 million rounded off.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councillor Kirkwood-White. Councillor Finn.
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. Kathy Hoffman, since we're on staffing and it comes up every year as to the amount of staff that we do have, it was asked during one of the open houses, how many staff retired in 2020 and how many of these staff were replaced? And of that number, how many needed to be replaced?
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. In 2020, we had 65 employees that retired. All of them were replaced with the exception of 4 whose work was either restructured or divided up and applied into other positions, and perhaps with a little bit of license, how many of them needed to be replaced. I would say all of them, and probably then some in this past year. During COVID, we certainly appreciated the service that employees provided. Those that retired this year did so in part because it was the time that they had planned to retire, and some also due to the circumstances that we had. And so we absolutely have needed all hands on deck in this year. Thank you, Councillor Finn.
And one more question that comes up every year as well. If you're able to provide the cost by department, if possible, for those that are currently on paid leave.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. I would presume that that question is maybe coming from 2 places. On leave could mean a couple of different things, so I'll just break it down accordingly. So we have employees that are on medical leaves. So they might either be utilizing their sick time or they might be on a long-term disability benefit. And I'm presuming you're talking about people who are on extended leaves. If they're on LTD, we're not continuing their salary. They're being paid through the LTD benefit, and the cost of that is associated with the benefit premium. There's also the group that you've referred to as being on leave as employees who are currently not working and they're on paid leave pending investigations. And this question came up a couple of times during the public information meetings. And for point of clarification, on the municipal side of the house, we do not have any employees that are on paid leaves under investigation. Our police services team do have that situation, and certainly I think we did some communication about those particular circumstances during the public meeting, and I don't have the specific cost of that. That would be something that Chief Khan would need to provide.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councillor Finn. Any other items from this page? Not seeing any hands, so we'll continue on to page 3. Any items on page 3 of interest? Questions, comments, motions related to items on page 3? Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item number 70, which is the implementation of a tree replacement program to a cost of $75,000.
Councillor Bondi, we're on page, sorry, just to pause you for a minute. We're on page 3 right now. You're on page 4, very eager, I appreciate it.
Okay, see you soon.
Any items on page 3? Okay, we're right back to you, Councillor Bondi, on page 4.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. That was quick. Thank you. Okay, again, item number 70, which is the implementation of a tree replacement program, which I support. I think it's a good idea. And as we all know, we're all under a little bit of pressure about tree cutting in the municipality. So my question about item number 70 is, as I recall, Councillor Sakachi had made, I believe it was a motion, a million tree planting program. So is there an update on that, and how does that relate to this $75,000 cost for a tree replacement program? Are they one and the same, or would they be, in a practical way, are they different?
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. It's Thomas Kelly, General Manager of IES. So this was a motion that was discussed at Council on May 25th, 2020. And it was to develop a street tree cover policy and to maintain tree coverage. So the idea is that if a tree dies, that we would replace it, or for any safety reasons we need to take it down, we would replace it. This is an ongoing budget ask, so every year it would be replenished $75,000. The amount of money that was in the other program was not meant for municipal right away. It was $1 million trees or dollars spent on planting trees throughout all of Chatham-Kent. So they have really two different purposes. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, well, that clears that up. So when we talk about the million, I think it was $1 million trees rather than $1 million, but I stand to be corrected on that. But so was that more of a replacement of woodlots rather than urban trees, which it sounds like this item, number 70, is more of a urban tree replacement?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. That's correct. It's an urban tree replacement. It's a regular fund that we can look to help manage the trees within our major urban centers. The $1 million trees was a one-time grant, and the determination of where all of those trees go, we're working closely with the Lower Thames to figure out appropriate locations for those trees.
Okay, great. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Sakachi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to actually make a motion in regards to that particular line item. item number 70 on tab 6 in the amount of $75,000 for the tree replacement program be changed to a 2-year pilot program in the amount of $150,000 and funded from the Emerald Ash Borer Reserve. Further, that this base budget request be considered again as part of the 2023 budget process.
Do we have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Oche, I believe. I see a lot of hands going up, so I think it was Councillor Oche first seconding that motion. Go ahead, Councillor Scacchi.
Yes, this was one of the. Sorry about that. This was one of the reserves that I isolated and spoke to Mr. Brown and Mr. Quinton about that. And you can clarify if I'm incorrect, but this is a reserve that's been in place for about 10 years or so that hasn't been utilized. Is that correct?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it was the result of the Emerald Ash Borer issues that we're having. My colleague, Jeff Bray, is also on the line. I'm going to turn it over to him to give you a little bit more history. Thank you.
Hi, Jeff Bray, Director of Parks, Recreation, and Cemeteries. Yes, the Emerald Ash Borer was, it's a one-time reserve. It doesn't get an annual influx of funds. It was created through a partnership with the Canadian Food and Inspection Agency. There was a contract set up where we are reimbursed for ash trees that were removed when the Emerald Ash Borer came through about a decade and a half ago. As everyone will recall, funds were set up for this sort of activity for reforestation.
Thank you, Mr. Bray. So I just think with the, all the conversations we've had this year, I just think this is, a very diligent way to ensure that we don't lose this program and that it's not going to have any kind of impact on the taxes this year. And as Mr. Bray said, this is a perfect example of what this money was kind of, it was intended to be used for. And hopefully council does support this and we can kind of go back to the 2023 budget if some of us are still here. Thank you.
Any comments on this particular motion? Councillor Pinsnow, was your comment towards this motion?
I have a comment on this one, and I had another comment on another item. But so just to be clear, we are leaving in the $75,000 in the base budget, though, correct? And then we're adding another $75,000 out of reserves of the Emerald Ash Borer Reserve because we need to leave that 75 in base. That is correct.
So it would be for the next 2 years, it would be funding that $75,000 from the reserve. So that would be removing the $75,000 from base budget. So it would be no net tax impact for the next 2 years while that's funded through existing money. And then after that, it would have to be debated to be added into the base budget.
Okay, can we add that into this, a friendly amendment that this comes back to us in 3 years? So that it doesn't get forgotten?
Oh, yeah, it's right there at the bottom there that it be considered again as part of the 2023
okay,
budget
right,
process.
right. All right, thank you.
Yeah. Any other comments on this motion? Seeing none, I will call the vote. Actually, before I do that, the hand went up and went down, so I will call the vote.
We're waiting for one more vote, Council. Please remember to hit submit. Here we go. All votes are in. And the motion passes.
Back to you, Councillor Pinsonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess through you to April. Line item 69. I read the briefing note on this, and it said basically we just want to add another $200,000 annually to the reserve. Can you explain to me what this is for?
Thank you, Councillor Pinsonneau, and through you, Budget Chair. This is an item to really where we've talked multiple times tonight about how we have reserves with a purpose where we build up those reserves to then have the dollars for capital builds or housing builds in this case. And so part of this is to make sure that we have enough base dollars moving forward to increase our affordable housing stock. So I'm going to stop there and I'll pass it over to Ray Harper for him to provide a bit more detail for this line item.
Thank you, April, and thank you, Councillor, through you to the budget chair. This 800,000 current in the base budget is the funding we use to develop affordable housing. And there was a report that was previously brought to council with a recommendation to increasing this to $1 million earlier in 2020. And this money doesn't just go to sit in a reserve for a rainy day or to collect out. This money would be tied to upcoming future RFPs to develop affordable housing and units in our community. And it's important to note that some of the funding streams and some of the affordable housing opportunities that are joint funded through provincial or federally would require us to kick in some of our money from ourselves to be successful to obtaining these funding opportunities. So this type of funding would be directly related to either build on our own through our own municipal or tied in with other funding streams.
Okay, I honestly don't see a whole lot of development going on this year due to the down year we had last year, and this year's starting out pretty much the same. And I guess if one of those opportunities did come along, I'm sure we could. We've got hundreds of millions, over 100 million in reserves. We could find the money to make it happen. So I am going to move that we remove line item 69.
Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Wright. Okay, so any other comments on this item? We'll start with Councillor Sakachi, followed by Councillor Kirkwood-White, followed by Councillor Latimer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My comment is related to a different motion I'm making. I'm okay, thank you.
Okay, moving on to Councillor Kirkwood-White. You're still muted, Councillor Kirkwood-White.
Sorry about that. Question, Ray, is the 200,000 that you're proposing to add to reserves part of the 651,000 that is in tab 9 on the CK Affordable Housing Reserve?
Thank you, Councillor, through the budget chair. No, that is, this is separate. This is our base budget funding that we have for affordable housing. And this request is an increase to the 800,000 to 1 million.
Okay, and so that is separate from the 651 that is being proposed to add to the existing reserve.
The 651, you're referring to the funding that is coming from our OFI provincial funding? I'm just looking for that tab now. Sorry, I got multiple tabs open.
Yeah, it's actually tab 9, line 53.
Budget Chair, it's April. I'm seeing, like, we have multiple tab 9s. So
9E, sorry, 9E.
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Page 2 of 5. About the middle of the page.
Councillor Crooked White, I can see that, and in that tab, that's the reserve tab. So I believe that's just a transfer to a reserve. So that's not a base budget funding item if I'm reading this correctly.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to get clarification that the 200 that Ray is just mentioning has nothing to do with that 651.
That is correct. That is not, that has nothing to do with it. That's 651.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for the response.
Thank you, Councillor Kirkwood White. Councillor Latimer.
Thank you, to the budget chair. Ray or April, could you give us an idea of perhaps potential investment or builds that we might expect over the next year, and remind us again what the waiting list is? I don't want to support this. I think I don't want to short ourselves despite our nose, because this is one area where we have to make sure that we have money ready for when we have that provincial and federal money come, which I would like you also to comment on, that we know is coming through the federal and provincial coffers.
It's April, Mr. Budget Chair. Ray, do you want to start with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the year 2020, right now, I just want to really highlight some of the things that are going on. We are building a 22-unit building in Ridgetown. That construction will be starting in the near future. That's going to be 22 single-bedroom units, 2-floor. And then there's a 2-unit building being started in Chatham on 90 Wellington Street. And we're breaking construction in Blenheim, and the Villa View project is they did experience some delays due to COVID. Right now, I have drafting up a report to council with regards to affordable housing initiative for the rapid housing initiative that I'm hoping that we're going to be successful. And if we are successful in getting that funding, that requires us to build these units within 12 months. So actually this year there is quite a bit going on for 2020 with regards to developing affordable housing.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. I really want to caution council not putting this money aside, because this year, more than ever, I think we have to be ready. And I think our Ray has done a good job. And I think that maybe some of you haven't taken time to read the report that's coming this Monday. But you got a good report there, Ray. And I really can't support not putting this money aside.
Thank you, Councillor Latimer. Councillor Crew, followed by Councillor Harrigan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My comments are similar to Councillor Latimer's. I don't think this is the year. We know one thing, that we have a housing crisis here, and our staff has been working really hard with partners and working in our community to build homes for people that are less fortunate or lower income, and we need to continue on the path that we have set out. I'm looking at anything and everything that comes up and willing to vote yes on things that I normally wouldn't, but I won't be supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor Crew. Councillor Harrigan. Sorry, you're muted, Councillor Harrigan.
Always, thank you. I just wanted to make comment that, you know, a lot of the reason why we are trying so hard to cut costs and get to a budget as with as little tax increase as possible is because we know that the COVID-19 pandemic has caused a lot of direct hardship for families. And I think especially in Chatham-Kent, we have seen that the impact of COVID-19 has also really provided visibility to the housing and homelessness challenges that far too many people in Chatham-Kent are facing. And while I really do appreciate what this motion is trying to do, I actually think if we dove kind of deeply into it, the reduction of this $200,000, maybe a 0.15 decrease in our tax increase, would probably cause significantly more costs in terms of the stopgap housing or the urgent housing that would need to be provided if we're, that much farther away from finding more permanent solutions for people when it comes to housing. And I also wanted to just remind Council of the really challenging conversations we had to have in discussing whether or not Chatham-Kent would have to run a homeless shelter. And ultimately, we are a housing first municipality, and that is the strategy that we have around housing, and that has certainly been a strategy that this council has applauded and committed itself to. And I think in this case, we really need to toe the line. We really need to keep this investment in our housing. And I'm really pleased to hear about all of the projects that are coming due in the next year or so. But I also recognize, as Thomas Kelly indicated earlier, is that those construction costs are increasing by the day. So it's important for us to continue to invest in these reserves so that we can see the benefits in the community, which I think stretch a heck of a lot farther than the $200,000 budget line. So I also will not be supporting this, appreciating the challenge that we're in as a council.
Thank you, Councillor Harrigan. Councillor Oche, followed by Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering, with all those builds that we're just speaking of, what would be left in the reserve after building all of those?
What would
just
Ray Harper here. Sorry, was the question directed to me? What would be left with the reserves? It broke up on me.
That's correct. Yes. Sorry. Yes. If we're to build all these affordable homes that you were just speaking on, what we would have left after in the reserves.
Are you referring to the projects that have already been approved by council, or the ones that I'm hoping to achieve that I have not vetted through?
Well, all the ones that you just spoke. All the ones that you just spoke on when they asked you what was in the plans for this year.
I'd have to look at the last report to council that had a reserve balance. You could give me a moment to try to find that.
Ray, perhaps I can help you out. It's Gord Quinton speaking. In our tab 9E of our reserve balances, we are stating that the current unallocated to projects, so there's still some work in progress going on, but the amount unallocated at this point in time is $545,000 is all that's left in that reserve right now, and prior to any 2021 allotments going into the reserves. So it is pretty depleted, and the reason for that, there's been a good job in the last year of quite a few projects have come to the table, at which I have depleted that reserve. So this there really isn't much left without the new funding coming in. We have added base in the last 2 years, our last few budgets, but this is the top up to the $1 million a year allotment that council approved in council reports in the past, that this is the targeted amount, and this was the last year to get to that target, adding this additional 200,000.
Okay, thank you very much, Gord. So, and this does not include the one that I believe Ray's working on right now, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, the 544,000 was only of the projects that have already been approved by council. The ones that he's working on will be coming to council to allocate the funds out of the reserve. So I guess what we're saying, Ray and his group are working to make sure that there's no very limited money left in this reserve, is that it's getting out the door as quick as it can come in, and within that projects are in the queue to
right, exactly. No, that's great, Gordon. Yep. Thank you very much, and thank you, Chair. So what I'm hearing, and if we get more projects coming up, is that we really do not have the money for it. So I with the last handful of speakers, I cannot support this either. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Oche. Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As Gordon Ray have just informed us, not that we're not aware of this, but our community has done a great job in the last couple of years of supporting affordable housing. So I think as a community, we really have stepped up to the plate. And this may be something that we can not support this year, because we could support this for $1 million. Like the need is never ending. Unfortunately, the need is never ending. So I understand this is a nice to do, and you know, again, if we had endless funds, then we should triple this kind of money, but we don't have that kind of endless money. And as far as the reserves being depleted, well, for sure, and that's a great thing, because we're using the money, we're using it for affordable housing. And clearly anybody that's been watching council and all of us know that we have been very good. We've been very accommodating to the affordable housing needs and requests in the last couple of years. So my question though really is, when we talk about a housing crisis in Chatham-Kent, what defines a housing crisis? Toronto must have a housing hurricane. If we've got a crisis, they've got a tsunami. So what's a crisis? You know, because really a crisis is a pretty tough word. You know, when you say crisis, you think, oh no, the sky's falling. Again, I live inside the city, like inner city, where this is where homelessness happens. It doesn't happen in the rural areas, of course. Well, I don't think so anyway, but of course I wouldn't know. But I've seen an increase in homelessness in Chatham, the city of Chatham, in the last couple of years, dramatically. 15 years ago, no. Did I see people under the bridge? No, I did not. And do I now? Yes, I do. So we do have this problem. COVID's added to it with Hope Haven being shut down due to COVID. So there's a lot of different factors in play here. But again, my question, I don't know who to direct it to, but where's a definition of crisis rather than problem, or maybe a lighter term, or maybe a more severe term? I just don't know. But I do think that saying Chatham has a homeless crisis, to me, sounds a little hard. And I don't know, where's the barometer? Where does that term cross a line from problem to crisis? Because crisis means, hey, let's do something about it right now. Problem means, okay, we've got a problem, let's deal with it appropriately, etc. So if somebody could chime in on that, that would be great. Thank you.
Mr. Budget Chair, it's April Rita. Can I chime in and start?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. So, Councillor Bondi, when we talk about a housing crisis, we really try and pull several factors together. And what I will start by saying, one, is that it is much more costly to run our rapid rehousing program, which we need right now, because we are servicing dozens and dozens of homeless individuals every single night. We need housing, and we need affordable housing. We need supportive housing. We need transitional housing in Chatham-Kent, and we need it as quickly as possible. So right now, if we want to look at where do we tip into a crisis point, I'm not sure we can identify that specifically, but currently, as of December, we had 759 households on our affordable housing wait list. And of those, 25% of those are seniors. And we see the number of seniors increasing dramatically in Chatham-Kent over the coming years. And right now, for our seniors in Chatham-Kent, the average wait time on that wait list before we find them an affordable place to live is 7 years. So to us, that's a crisis. And we need an array of housing options and solutions to find homes for all of our Chatham-Kent citizens that need an affordable option. So the housing report that's coming to council on Monday night, really, Ray and Polly have done a great job in terms of really identifying the difference between emergency housing and what that costs, transitional housing, supportive housing, those are things like indwell, and affordable housing, right through to market rent, both for renting and then market ownership. So we need housing units, and we need them quickly. So to me and my team, I think that is a crisis. And I'll stop there, Mr. Budget Chair, and certainly if any of our other team members want to add anything, I will turn that back to you.
Thank you for that response. Councillor Bondi, did you have any follow-up questions?
Yeah, sure. Just one quick question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. What qualifies somebody for being on a waiting list? Because the 7-year waiting list is horrific. That's a terrible to even think about, especially for a senior, 7 years. So to qualify, or is there a qualification for being on a waiting list for affordable housing? And I'm not trying to be heartless about the whole thing. I'm just trying to get to the bottom of it. Like, is there like a income level that makes housing unaffordable? Do people, somehow, is there some sort of a checklist on this person qualifies for affordable housing and this person does not, or is it just an open waiting list? And again, I'm not trying to be crass about it, but I'm just trying to be honest and find an honest answer to it, because the 7-year waiting list, of course, that's a terrible thing. I can't see 2 months down the road, let alone 7 years. So yeah, is there a qualification for that 7-year list?
It's Ray Harper through the budget chair, but if you don't mind me adding, yes, there is definitely qualifications to get on this list, and these details are listed on our website for applicants. So there's an application process to apply for our affordable housing programs and our RGI programs, and certainly there's income limits and thresholds in order to be eligible for applying. It's just we only have so many units, and our municipality is sharing the same problem that many others are. Is just not enough units for a number of people in need, and our wait list in our area is 7 years.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one other quick question, and thank you very much for that, Ray. I appreciate that, and I'm glad that there is some sort of qualification for the list. My second quick question would be, is there any murmurings with administration to return back to the idea of a bricks and mortar shelter in Chatham-Kent, or is that a past idea and we're not going to go there anymore?
Through you, Budget Chair, it's April. What I'm going to let Polly Smith, she's on the line, our Director of Employment and Social Services, and certainly I will let her start, and then if I want to add anything afterwards, I will do that. So Polly, can you answer Councillor Bondi's question?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for this question. It is very important. There is similar plans to that, and the report on Monday goes into detail. So I'll just give a really quick overview. The cost of sheltering people in hotels and motels is prohibitive to be sustainable. So the plan, we have moved to a rapid rehousing model where people are basically in hotel rooms with supports right now. It's really more of transitional housing than a shelter per se. And we would like to have a bricks and mortar solution for that until there is enough affordable housing for the need.
Okay, well, that's everything. Great. Thanks very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bondi. Councillor Carmen McGregor. You're still muted there, Carmen.
Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. And through our budget chair, Brock McGregor, you know, I can't support this motion whatsoever. You know, if I had my dithers, I'd be doubling the amount that is going into this. I think that, you know, when we hear the stats of the homeless or those in need and supportive housing and different things that we as a community need to be doing whatever we can to support those people within our community. Because if we can't take care of those within our community, I don't know what we're doing. And, you know, if it means a little more of an increase for our general population that can afford to do it, then I think we need to seriously look at this, because, you know, to me, leaving people behind and people without housing and people in need is not what I'm about, certainly not what I want to be about on council. So I certainly cannot support this. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor McGregor. Mayor Caniff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to reiterate a lot of things that are said. I want to ask a question of April through you. Just the money we put into this fund, we get funding from the federal provincial government as well, do we not?
Thank you for the question, Mayor Caniff, and through you, Budget Chair. The short answer of that is it depends. So every year we receive provincial and federal funding. And what we do is we combined that funding in any number of ways for housing developments. And so I'm going to ask Ray if he can also add into that with what he talked briefly about it, with what we have applied for that is looking at some larger funds coming our way, where we have to be able to chip in dollars as well for municipal kind of skin in the game. But he can explain that in a bit more detail for us.
Thank you, April, and thank you to the budget chair. I'd like to answer this in twofold. Yes, we do receive funding on a yearly basis that is subject to change in, for example, our OFI provincial funding. Now that funding can go towards developing affordable housing, which is what we are first priority, or replenishing and repairing current housing stock. One caveat with some of the funding streams are some of the restrictions and some of the reporting methods that in the past have shied some not-for-profits, or sorry, not our not-for-profits, but other private to engage with putting in proposals for these RFPs. So we use that funding stream and combine with our current municipal dollars to put together RFPs that are attractive and build on economies of scale to see what kind of pool of funding we can develop with. And the second part of the question is there are some funding that I'm going after, that I'm targeting, that would require us during the evaluation process, because it's a point system, they evaluate the proposals, for us to be able to put in a certain percentage to enable to get the funding. So if we don't have money on the table to be able to target these, I wouldn't be able to apply for some of these potential funding affordable housing builds. So I could just say just like a 75-25 percentage, so to speak. Don't quote me on that. I'm just trying to make an easy to understand picture. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that answers my question. That this is an investment in our community. This is not a cost. And I look at, if we don't make investments, look at the social costs that we incur as a society. Look at the costs, temporary housing. Look at the impacts on businesses, and most importantly, look at the impacts of the individuals. And when we're getting some matching funds from the province and those things, we need to do this. It's a really important thing, so I cannot support cutting this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Councillor Hall.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just to reiterate a lot what the mayor said and some of my fellow colleagues as well, I absolutely cannot support this. And just want to remind council of some of our, our council priorities for this term of council. We talk a lot about growth. We talk a lot about environmental sustainability, but one of those, key elements of our CK Plan 2035 and our priorities is community wellness. And, listed right underneath community wellness is to ensure that there's a variety of affordable housing options to meet needs. And I think those needs have been very explained very clearly by our staff. So I absolutely won't be supporting this thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Councillor Sakachi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Most of my comments have just been made by the last two speakers. And I just want to commend Dr. Redyke and her team on the remarkable job that they've done through these challenging situations. And Dr. Redyke, I do know what your answer is going to be. But I just want you to comment, just because I'm somewhat concerned that, if this does pass, this will be detrimental to our community. In your opinion, this is no means a want. This is an absolute need for a community. Is that an accurate statement?
Thank you, Councillor Sakachi, through you, Budget Chair. Yes, I concur with all of the councillors that have spoken. We need housing, and we need all types of housing, but we need affordable housing, and we need it now. So this to us is certainly a need, and for the health and wellness and kind of future recovery of this community. Yes, this one's a need, not a want.
Thank you very much, Dr. Redyke, and I think that we have to ensure we're looking at the costs of saving costs at some times. So thank you very much.
Any other comments on this motion? And I will offer some final comments. I do think that it's important to note this is a pretty modest increase to what is a very well-established crisis, not just in our community, but nationally. We've seen growing public support for strategies to address this issue. So we've seen that nationally with the Canadian National Housing Strategy, and we've seen it in our own community. I know well in budget we get rightly hyper-focused on cost containment, and I think it's important to note in community consultation through the budget process the the concept of housing availability, housing affordability, homelessness, and access to affordable housing was one of the most common themes to see in responses. So it's not just a need that we recognize as councillors in our strategic direction, but it's a need that the community has been very vocal about supporting. So I think we need to recognize that that this is a very small contribution towards a very large problem that we're going to learn much more about Monday night yet again. And I think we need to be really cognizant this is an important area to invest in our community. And with that, I will call the vote.
Looks like we're missing about 3 councillors, so if you can remember to hit submit. All votes are in, and the motion is defeated.
Any other items on page 4 of tab 6? Can you go to the attendees list?
Just a point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yep, Councillor Harrigan, go ahead.
I don't know if I voted yes or no to the last motion while quickly voting, but I would like it to go on record that I voted no.
Okay, that's noted. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Sakachi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make the following motion, and I'll discuss it after. That items number 75 on the tab 6 in the amount of $41,586 for the discontinuance of the seasonal beach bus service, change to continue the service on Saturdays and holiday Mondays for a period of 1 year period with a net cost of $19,748 and funded from the transit reserves.
Do I have a seconder for that motion?
I'd be happy to second it.
Councillor Thompson, thank you. Councillor Sakachi, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to keep this very short. This is a concern that I've heard from many members of our community. Councillor Thompson, Councillor Latimer, and myself are, often sit on the committee in ERIO, and this was something that they actually brought to our attention because it was kind of hidden in one of the reports. And doing some investigation, I brought up some articles that were, released in May of 2019 that would basically touch base on how successful the program was. And it had municipal staff comments in regards to, it allowing people to go to the beach and enjoy it, to spend time in ERIO, Mitchell's Bay, and all the stops that it's making. And I think that when we have a service like this, quantifying it with ridership is somewhat challenging because there's many little, businesses in these lakeside communities that, in bayside communities that really need the community to come out on a regular basis in the summertime. So what I would like to see is this, if we can't operate it this year because of obviously the circumstances, and I know this might be void anyways, I do like to see it in operation at least for Saturdays and on holiday weekends. And I think it brings a great value to supporting our local restaurants in those areas. And if it doesn't work this year, then at least we tried it in a modification aspect. But I don't like to see the community suffer. There's a lot of people in our communities that don't have the opportunity to drive to these locations. And this provides a safe and accessible access to those points.
Thank you, Councillor Sakachi. Councillor Latimer, do you have a comment on this motion?
I do. Thank you through the chair. I'd like to applaud Councillor Sakachi for taking the time to dive into the reserves and work with transit on this. I also think it gives the community, all of us, a time to see how well this bus is used, especially for the holidays and the weekends, but also for the communities themselves. I know there is some consideration for coming up with a partnership, public-private partnership for this bus. So if it's a success, I'd love to see it part of the on-demand, but we're not there yet. But I'd also wonder if there was anyone in the community that would be willing to fund this, and not for this particular budget year, but that might be something we work on over the next year for next budget. So I'll be in support of this motion completely.
Councillor McGrail. You're muted, Councillor McGrail.
There we go. Thank you. I too am in support of this. This gives opportunity for everybody within the municipality of Chatham-Kent to get out and explore and experience Chatham-Kent. And taking this away, limits people within our community. And, we should extend that hand. And, people should go out and explore. Even in these times when we can't go anywhere, there's many different places we can go within Chatham-Kent.
Thank you, Councillor McGrail. Councillor Pinsino. You're muted, Councillor Pinsino.
I said, sorry, I put the lower my hand. It's for another issue.
Okay, we'll come back to you after this vote then. I don't see any other comments. I did have a question. Is the seasonal bus service generally area rated? Not sure who that question is to Thomas, I suspect. Oh, we'll unmute him. We might have muted him.
Yeah, thank you. I could not get through. I'm going to, the current designation is, I'm just checking right now. It's noted as a base budget ask at this time.
Right, so it's general taxation. And
Yes.
And my question would be: is the reserve we're funding it out of? It's the Chatham Conventional Service Reserve. So I anticipate there's funding in that reserve from area rated payers. So particularly people in the Chatham area that have an area rated fee for conventional service are funding that reserve, likely with other gas tax funds. But then we're going to transfer from a area rated funded reserve a service that is not typically area rated. So I guess, it's a small amount of money. I think my concern is, I think rightly we would be upset if we, sorry, maybe I'll ask again about that area rating for the beach bus. Do you want to answer, Steve? I'll go to Steve for that.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So in the past, the beach bus was area rated. On noting on the T within the page 4 for that item, that stands that it's an area rated charge.
Okay, that answers my question and clears my concern. Thanks. Any other comments or questions regarding this motion? Seeing none, I will call the question.
Councillor, sorry, Budget Chair, can I just ask a couple clarifying questions?
Sure.
So the motion is clear for Labor Day, Victoria Day, which are both fall on Mondays. I believe what it's saying is that on the holiday weekends, that service would go Saturday, Sunday, Monday, correct? When the holiday falls on Monday? I wanted to be sure that's the first one. July 1st actually falls on a Thursday. So that service would not be offered then. It would only be a Saturday. And then I'm just checking when August, the civic holiday is right now. And it is on a Monday. So this is just for clarity, please, in the motion. So we have 3 of the holidays that fall on Monday. Is this asking us to run it on Saturday and Monday? And the second question is, we assume we don't run it all on July 1st because it's a Thursday.
Councilor Sakachi?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I guess if from a wording standpoint, if who's ever, I'm not sure who's doing the wording at this particular second, but my anticipation and my want would be that it operates on those weekends. If it's on a Thursday, then it would operate the Thursday and then the weekend of that long weekend. Since it's only one weekend, it might alter the fund and the cost somewhat. In talking to Mr. Clark, the adaptability in the contract is very welcoming. So if he has to change the wording and the funding aspects of the cost, I can wait for that alteration. If you want to move on to a different aspect, that's okay.
Just a moment. We'll discuss that just offline here for 30 seconds and get right back to you, Councilor Sakachi.
And in Budget Chair, my team is, I've been in dialogue with my team. It is our understanding that this particular reserve cannot be used for this purpose. And I'd like to ask Anne-Marie Millison to speak on that, please. This was a reserve that was provided by the government, and there are certain rules and regulations. So Anne-Marie, could you please comment?
Thank you, Thomas. Through the chair, this is Anne-Marie Millison, Manager, Engineering, Transit, and Capital Asset Management. Just for a point of clarification, I want to make sure, Gord, this is not the reserve that is the gas tax. Is it the Chatham Reserve?
Thank you. From what I understand in the motion, this is from the Chatham Conventional Transit Reserve that has built up some surpluses over time from fare surpluses in that area rated service. So if council is wondering where this money is being saved up for, it is for this is one of the areas that we'd be looking to when there's any major capital upgrades in the Chatham Conventional Transit system. One future item that I know is in the works over the next few years is upgrades to our downtown depot in Chatham. Now,
yeah, could I?
Council can still. It is a council-controlled reserve, though. That I'm with that kept in mind that's where the money came from, but it is under council's control of if they want to use it for this purpose.
Thank you, Gord. The reason I wanted to ask for clarification is council will be aware that there was ICIP funding that we applied for, which is the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Transit Stream, and the reserve that is currently targeted through this recommendation has been set aside to fully restore the downtown terminal and to hopefully also purchase some shelters, also with some of our current gas tax reserves. So I was wondering if we could make a friendly amendment to allow transit to choose a reserve to possibly fund this from, other than the one that has been targeted, because I have received the ICIP and we do have to have our municipal portion, and I had targeted this reserve to be basically deleted of funding if we start our construction project within the next year.
And not that I want to confuse the issue anymore, but an option could be to change it to the strategic reserve we talked about.
Yeah, we could change it to a reserve to be named so that we could pick an appropriate reserve that isn't earmarked for anything else. And we know that that strategic reserve is being funded at a lesser level over the coming years, so it might not be the best area to look.
Yeah, if we can just change that to reserves and we'll
Identify one.
identify
Councillor,
one and let council know which one's picked at
Okay.
a later date.
Okay, great. Councillor Sakachi, would that be a friendly amendment to change it from the Chatham Transit Reserve to just the wording from reserves, and then we'll note that later what reserve that's coming from?
That's fine, Mr. Chair. Just for clarification, though, that I did try to limit the confusion and work with staff on this aspect to ensure that this wasn't going to be an issue. So let's just say $20,000. If it came out of a almost $1.4 million reserve, it would hinder that reserve. If that's the case, then I'm okay with the amendment. Does it have to come from a councillor though, or can it come from the staff?
Well, I can make it can come from a councillor. So I can wait to see a hand up that would make the amendment that I just mentioned, or you could make it yourself. I see Councillor Latimer making that friendly amendment. So as long as you're good with it, Councillor Sakachi will add it in there, and then we can vote on this one.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. Sorry for the confusion, sir.
Oh, not a problem.
Councillor McGregor.
Yep, Councillor Latimer, go ahead.
It's Councillor Latimer. I just have a question. I thought I heard Anne-Marie say she wondered if I feel more comfortable if it said funded from transit, a transit reserve. I thought she meant they would use another, they have another reserve they can pull from? Rather than just saying from reserves, because we don't have any idea where it's coming from.
Yeah, so I think we can identify an appropriate reserve as related to transit as possible. It's we are in budget. It's a smaller amount of one-time funding, so I think it's just a matter of making sure we're not taking anything that's earmarked and impacting other funding, if that makes sense.
All right. Well, okay, I'll let it go.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I
Okay, thank
appreciate the intent of what we're trying to.
Absolutely. Okay, Councillor Sakachi, did you have another comment? I see your hand up there. Oh,
no, I do not. No, I do not. Thank you.
Okay, with that, we'll call the question.
Mr. Budget Chair, I apologize. I'm online with my team. We still are not clear on the level of service the question I asked. So we have 3 Mondays and holidays, and we have 1 on a Thursday. Is the intent to run Saturday, Sunday, Monday on this, and then forgive no service on the July 1st holiday? I just wondered if that could be clarified, please.
Okay, Councillor Sakachi.
Can it please be reworded all holidays and holiday weekends? If that would make things easier.
If that satisfies Mr. Kelly, understanding that we're talking about summer holidays and we won't be running any Christmas buses to the beach.
Very, very good point, Mr. Chair.
Thomas, would that work for you? Is that
I was just waiting for the change. Is this the motion that's been changed now? It's and holiday weekends and all Saturday. Nothing's changed. I was waiting for the retyping.
Perhaps if we're changing the number of days, that dollar amount's going to change as well. Could we get comment from Ian Clark if he's on? Would you have an answer to that question?
Yeah, he's on, and we may have to. Again, we're still not clear on what the requirement is, because we just said all holidays now too. So I think if we could just, we have 3 holiday Mondays, and on those holiday weekends, you're saying you want to run Saturday, Sunday, Monday, I believe, correct? Yes. Okay, and then on the July 1st weekend, which is a Thursday, I think what I heard was you want it to run on July 1st, and then we would also run on the Saturday. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Kelly.
Okay, so if the budget team could just add holiday weekends and, just for clarity again, July 1st and July 3rd. And I'm checking with my team budget chair right now if that figure is still the right number. Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mr. Budget Chair, it's April. Can I just chime in for a sec?
Absolutely.
I am wondering if we can take this money from our Ontario Works Corporate Initiatives Reserve. This reserve is really intended to help individuals and families in our community. And I think by allowing some of our folks who don't have access to transportation to get out to the beach, I think that that's a reasonable reserve to pull this from.
I would agree. Does that sound like it works to you, Councillor Sakachi?
Dr. Redek is a problem solver. Thank you very much, Dr. Redek.
My apologies, Mr. Budget Chair, but I don't, the motion has changed now that it doesn't mention all Saturdays. And I assume this service would start Victoria Day weekend and run through to Labor Day.
Okay, we're just working on that right now.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Kelly, does that look like it works for clarity?
Yeah, except we're just missing starting Victoria Day holiday and ending on Labor Day. I don't see the duration of the time.
Okay,
and we have confirmed that the figure is correct, Budget Chair.
Okay, great. Yeah, I know that Councillor Sakachi did work to confirm that figure beforehand as well. And we're just getting that wording up here shortly.
Mr. Budget Chair, this is clear to us now. Thank you.
Okay, with that, our screen of hands is down, so I'm assuming there's no more questions on this this motion right now. If someone else does have a question, they can just unmute themselves and yell at me right now, but it's looking like we're good. Okay, so I will call the question.
We're waiting for one more counselor to vote, please. And all votes are in, and the motion passes.
Okay, Councillor Pinsino, did I have you on the list for another item on this page?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just, line item 74, it's a supplementary, but I thought that the drainage work was assessed back to the property owners. And I see that's a $731,000 cost to us. Someone explain that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Oh, go ahead, Thomas.
Oh, sure, Gord. Thank you. Actually, my colleague Tim Dick is on the line, and the key here is urban assessments, but I'll let him explain that. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Mr. Kelly is right. It is an urban assessment. Council will recall that Councillor Pinsino is correct. In the rural areas, we assess the drainage works out according to the engineers' reports and the individual property owners. But in the urban areas, it's typically rated out as an area rated charge. So the 731 is a split amount, which was half of the, or approximately half or so of the last year's high amount as a result of the Grand Avenue project. So it's an urban cost that is area rated collectively to all the urban areas.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other items on this page? All right. Seeing none, we will move on to page 5 under tab 6. Any items on, Councillor Oche.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to whoever can answer this for me. Number 84, I just had someone message me asking me if this is going to be every year now, this particular new service, or is it a trial, as well as how many riders now take the bus from Tilbury to Merlin to, well, everywhere it goes, and then into Chatham.
Thank you, Budget Chair. It's Thomas Kelly, General Manager of IES. So the intent is that it would, it's currently a trial, and our proposal, with this proposal here, we're making it a long-term ad. I'm going to turn the second part of the question over to my colleague, Ian Clark, who can tell you about ridership. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. This is Ian Clark, Transit Project Manager. Can I just get clarity on the question, Councillor? You're asking for the ridership numbers on Route D, which is the route that services Chatham to Tilbury?
Correct, please.
And Councillor, if it's the same to you, I'll be using 2019 numbers that are unaffected by the pandemic. Is that okay?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
So Councillor, Route D, the interurban route servicing Chatham to Tilbury with destinations in between, had 3,262 boardings during the calendar year in 2019.
Thank you. And was this part of the survey? Is that why we're now adding the midday run? This is a question I've been asked as well. Thank you.
Yep, through you, Budget Chair. The midday run was originally recommended through the CK Transit Task Force. It was their goal at the time that a more convenient midday trip would encourage greater ridership numbers, as many riders were using the system for shorter trips into Chatham to go to the doctor's office, grocery stores, things like that. And those that were doing so would be waiting in Chatham upwards of 5 or 6 hours to catch the afternoon trips out. So this afternoon trip made it more convenient, with the goal of not just making it more convenient for those riders, but ideally attracting new riders to the system.
Thank you very much for that. And back to through you, Mr. Chair, to Thomas. Thomas, if this was going to be just a trial, why did you want to add it to the budget?
Thank you, Budget Chair. So what I'm saying, it has been a trial. The trial would have, it's been a very successful trial. We provided a report to council at the end of last year to show you the increased ridership because of this route. And if we do not approve this, that particular route will end at the end of June this year. So because of the success of the trial we've been running for over the last year, it's our proposal to make that a permanent route. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. All her questions have been answered.
Councillor Sakachi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've actually had two questions in regards to line number 82. I just wanted to see if you can just give a kind of a brief for the people watching, just a brief summary of line number 82 in regards to how it plays out, just so people can understand a little bit more diligently.
Well, thank you, Budget Chair. I'll turn it over to my my transit expert, Ian Clark. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. So line 82, this is the CK Transit on request service. This again, just like the service we just discussed, it was a pilot, a trial service. It launched in March of this past year in 2020 and was scheduled to run until June 30th of 2021. Due to the early success of the service, even during the pandemic, we are recommending that this evening service become a permanent part of the CK Transit network. It is a demand responsive service that allows us to offer transit to residents past 7:15 p.m. between Monday to Friday within the community of Chatham.
Thank you very much. You definitely explained it a lot better than I did, Mr. Clark. Appreciate that.
Any other items under this tab? So any items on this page, or if anyone has skipped over something on a previous page, you're welcome to bring that forward as well. Okay, seeing none, we will move briefly into tab 7, items recommended through other funding. Seeing as we're at 9:20, we'll go through a few questions if we can get through a couple of these pages, and then pick it up next week. So any questions, comments, motions related to page 1? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to page 2. Seeing none, page 3. Okay, seeing none, so we're through that tab. Is there any items under items not recommended, tab 8, that anyone would like to bring forward or has questions or comments on? Okay, so that's as far as we'll go through the book this evening. In our next budget meeting, we'll entertain motions from the floor. If anyone has a question for further information or clarity that they'd like some more information, if you'd like to ask that of staff now, that's fine. Otherwise, I'd encourage you to get that off in an email tomorrow or over the weekend so that we're well prepared moving into Tuesday night. Councillor Sakachi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to see before we left the meeting if it was possible to get an estimate of where we're at currently.
Yes, we're at 3.12.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Oche.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question actually the first night that we were into the budget, and I was told I'd get an answer on it, but I haven't heard anything yet as far as the Capitol Theatre and if this is the year that it could be modified from a theater or if it could be sold. Could I please get that answer?
Just one moment, Councillor Oche.
Budget Chair, it's Don Shropshire speaking. I'm happy to answer the question.
Thanks, Don.
Thanks. Councillor Oche, the Capitol Theatre, we have an obligation with the province of Ontario that the building has to operate as a theatre until 2027. That does not mean that we cannot sell the theatre, but whoever purchased it would either have to continue to operate it as a theatre, or we'd have to get special permission from the province to renegotiate the deal. But the current arrangement is 2027 to be operated as a theatre. We did investigate this opportunity to sell the theatre to St. Clair College a few years ago, and the province at that time was prepared to give us permission to sell it to the college, and they had agreed to run it as a theatre. Unfortunately, they withdrew their offer at the time, but 2027 is the stipulation is as operating as a theatre as if when we can sell it.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And seeing no other questions for the evening, we do need a motion to adjourn. So I'll read that out and then look for a mover and a seconder. So that the Budget Committee move into wrong one. Sorry. This session of the Budget Committee meeting will recess until 6 o'clock on February 2nd. As per the public notice bylaw, Chatham-Kent Council hereby gives public notice of its intention to hold public meetings and adopt the 2021 budget immediately following receipt of a recommended budget from the Chatham-Kent Budget Committee. The Budget Committee also gives public notice of the need to meet in closed session at any time during the budget deliberation process as permitted by the Municipal Act 2001. Moved by Councillor Carmen McGregor, seconded by Councillor Karen Coker-White. Any opposed? Seeing none. Good night, and we'll see you next week.